Welcome back. Wow. If you were listening earlier, Navi Raju about the French company Decathlon, where the CEO and his team converted Vision 2030. We all have these digital visions for the future teams at our companies. Vision 2030 became Vision 2021 to accelerate that digital transformation. And this is not unusual. It's certainly aggressive in their timeline, but not unusual. Rita Gunter McGrath said, big vision, but start small. And I'd add to that, move really fast these days. Gary Hoberman, wow, I hope you felt the transformative opportunity there and also the energy and the excitement that Gary brought. Gary Hoberman and I met two ways originally, one through Emmett Keefe at Insight Partners, and then also the first time I had in 2017 published an article in Quartz about the notion that later this century knowing to code will be something like knowing ancient Greek. A badge of honor, but not useful for most of us. Now, a lot of people panned it. I got a lot of big support from people in the tech community. I also, as you might guess, got a few, well, nasty notes. And one of the big support notes was from Gary Hoberman. He said in late 2017, I totally agree. And by the way, that's the company I've just founded. And here they are today. I can't wait to see what's next. In terms of what's next today on Twin Tech, our finale, we have another block now, which we have entitled Radically Better Lives, Opportunities and Responsibilities. It is true in this new age, we have extraordinary opportunities to change how we live, work, create value, experience life. But we also, with those, have a lot of challenges and responsibilities that we have to face. So in this block, we have three organizations, three companies who are truly changing the world in their realms. And so while you watch, I want you to think about the extraordinary transformations we'll all experience, as well as the challenges we'll face. The first segment is with our very good friends from Livongo. Lee Shapiro is a board member of Twin, a co-founder of Twin, and also a co-founder of Livongo and their chief financial officer. He's joined by Jennifer Schneider, the president of that great company, in a conversation with Anita Vanavata. Livongo is one of the standouts this year, and along with Teladoc, with which they'll merge later this year, will be a leader of the digital health revolution. Following that, you'll be joined here in this seat by Scott Bowman, my great partner at Clario and also a co-founder of Twin, who will be in conversation with Lee Che, the founder of Brightseed Bio, and I can't wait for you to see what they're doing at Brightseed Bio with artificial intelligence. And finally, I'm really excited about the interview that Dimitri Alperovich and I pre-recorded a couple of months ago about Crowdstrike. As a co-founder of Crowdstrike and now a founder of a think tank and policy Accelerator in Washington, D.C., Dimitri Alperovich is at the tip of the spear, the center of cybersecurity and all of our securities in the future. So with that, I'd love to turn to this next block, Transformative Lives, Challenges, and Opportunities.
Welcome to TwinTech 2020. I'm Anita Vanavata, founder of Decent Labs, and I'm honored to actually welcome our two incredible guests that we can sit down and have a chat with today. Dr. Jennifer Schneider, who is the president of Livongo, and then Lee Shapiro, who is the chief financial officer of Livongo. Before I even start, I would say congratulations. Big year for Livongo and for both of you for this incredible merger with Teladoc. So before, I want to know all the juiciest details possible on that. But before we go there, how did you start? Really walk us through your journey of how did you both meet? How did the even Livongo journey start?
This journey, started with an idea that our healthcare system is truly broken in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to helping individuals with chronic disease. The executive chair of Livongo, the founder of Livongo, Glenn Tillman, and I have been business partners for over 25 years. Some of you may know Glenn as Howard's little brother, and Howard is a longtime supporter of Twin. And what we learned through his journey with his son Sam, who was diagnosed at age 12 with type 1 diabetes, is that our system makes it so hard to do the things that you need to do in order to stay healthy. And I know that Jenny feels a real kinship to those who are facing this because of her own personal circumstances. And Jenny, maybe you want to share a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So I've lived with type 1 diabetes since I was 12. I'm now 45, so for 33 years, and I'm also trained as a doctor. So I've gotten to see that world of chronic conditions from the lens of the patient as well as the physician. And the reality is the system is broken, like Lee said. As people living with chronic condition, you're asked to record data to then see a doctor 3 months later to help identify what happened 2 months ago on a Wednesday at noon without any pattern recognition. It got to be the point, even when I was young, that I realized that there wasn't a whole lot that was making sense in that dialogue because the data was so outdated to the dialogue that I would just fill out the blood glucose log on my way into the doctor's office with made up numbers because it didn't really seem to matter if I did it the right way or not. And then as a physician, I really realized that most of my job in the doctor's office was about motivating individual people and really trying to understand the context to change behavior. And people aren't motivated, it turns out, by medical guidelines. People are motivated by what they love in their life, whether that's a partner, a child, a dog. And so if I could start to frame things for people, for example, to get to do exercise and suggest that they take their dog for a walk after dinner, my medical brain is thinking that's going to control their blood glucose. I don't tell them that. I tell them your dog would really love a walk. Great hour to take your dog is 6 p.m. You eat dinner at 5. That would be perfect. And once you start to think about this, I got this sense of living in both worlds that there's this world of data that we capture that we don't leverage in healthcare the same way we do in other industries. We often talk about how Amazon has revolutionized the purchasing component. Google has revolutionized content, right? They've taken the industry and completely revolutionized it with data and personalization driven to individual people. But healthcare, as Lee was saying, this is kind of crossing this big gap here. Healthcare had not yet done that. And there's not a better place to start than people with chronic conditions, because we know that chronic conditions account for the biggest bulk of healthcare expenditure. We know that millions and millions of people suffer from one or multiple. We know about 70% of people over age of 65 have 2 or more chronic conditions. And so it was a great place for us to focus our energy with a true deep empathy from Glenn, the founder, Lee, the team, around what that experience is really like and how we could create a radically different experience that not only allowed people to enjoy their chronic condition a whiff more rather than we couldn't quite take it away, but we could make that experience more enjoyable, but also improve clinical outcomes and take out a lot of the financial waste and demonstrate cost savings in the ecosystem.
I actually personally relate to diabetes as a condition. Not that I have it, but both my parents had complications. They both passed away because of diabetic complications. So before I dive into data, because I have a ton of questions around data, I know there's so much conversation happening, also some controversial. Let's get back to the big announcement, which is a fascinating, most exciting, the biggest in the history of healthcare. In the midst of a pandemic, you went through an $18.5 billion merger. Tell me more.
I'll start, but I will also start by saying the kudos go to Lee's industry veteran status on many fronts, both starting and leading us through our IPO, then into the merger. But I'm going to start with more of a little bit of a humorous story, and then let Lee take the reins. But Lee, as you know, was a founding member of Livongo and an investor through 7wire and served on the board. And when we were thinking about our ability to really accelerate the business to our clients on behalf of our members, really staying member focused, we started to think about an IPO. And at that time, we did not have a CFO, and Lee left the room to take a phone call. And when he came back in, we told him that he had been voted to become the CFO to lead us through the IPO. So that was when he got to take the reins in an operating style. And that's actually not a joke. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lee.
Lee, please.
Well, and so I must say that with Jenny's prodding and Glenn's prodding, we did take the company public in July of 2019. It was a massive amount of work because as a young company we didn't necessarily have all the infrastructure in place that would have made us the right candidate to say, well, gee, let's go ahead and access the public markets. And frankly, we had raised a meaningful amount of capital. We had an enviable balance sheet. And so it wasn't like we saw a burning need to be public. And yet what we realized was that if we were going to be a trusted partner for the Fortune 500 clients that we serve and the major health plans and health systems, over 100 health systems that we work with today, they would want to know that they were working with a company that was here for the long term, a company built to last, a company that provided transparent financial statements, and therefore they could see had the wherewithal to support them and their members on the journey that they were on to improve health. And so in going public and raising what we thought was, in fact, the largest digital health IPO at the time, raising hundreds of millions of dollars in a record offering, we felt that we were on a mission, and the race really began that day. The IPO was the end of the beginning. And what we were starting to do was to look at ways that we could expand our footprint in a massive market opportunity in the US, but also globally. Unfortunately, we're in a position today where by 2025, with the export of Western-style diets and other lifestyles, there will be more individuals in India and China with diabetes than there are people in the United States. And so when we think about helping individuals with chronic disease to live better and healthier lives, it's not limited to Mountain View. It's not limited to Chicago. It is around the world. And to do that, you need a platform. And you need one that's going to have scale and the ability to deliver care in ways that allow you to transcend borders and locations. And as we thought with Jenny's leadership on our strategy about what that future could look like, we saw that being partnered with the leader in telehealth, Teladoc, was going to be a way for us to achieve those objectives. And that led us to having discussions over a relatively short period of time, virtually done the entire deal except for a few face-to-face meetings that were, of course, with masks and socially distanced. But all said and done, a record amount of time for a record deal, the largest of its kind, as you mentioned, Aditya. Jenny, other observations on that?
No, just to underscore that we often get asked the question, why now, why timing, why these two? And the answer to that is because we can accelerate in a way that's otherwise, it gives us an unbelievable chance to accelerate. We think about the 70 million lives that Teladoc has and the data engine and the infrastructure that we've built across the chronic conditions so that we can really service individual people in an acute, episodic and chronic way across multiple conditions, and could not be more excited at the ability to take two leaders in their respective sides and bring that together.
What is next? Is digital health now purely digital? Because we live in such fluid spaces, right? I mean, I moved from my virtual reality to my physical desktop, and I'm really moving around and the data flows with me. And then I want to be served as a patient in that same manner. Where is it evolving?
Well, it is truly evolving. And in some sense, we've only just crossed, I'd say, one of the many digital Rubicons to come, which Rob Walcott will certainly appreciate. And the reason why I say that is that while we've started to understand a bit more about the power of data for health, we've really not yet created personalized pathways, personalized journeys. What we've done at Livongo and will do as Teladoc Livongo is to better informate the healthcare process and to allow those individuals who have that information the power to make the changes that they need personally. But when you're consulting with a professional, do something different. But we're really starting to now embark on new areas that will allow for us to understand the way in which we metabolize medications. I'll metabolize it differently than Jenny or you. And what does that mean in terms of my dosing? And how can we better personalize the way in which medications are prescribed? Too often we're treating people as just one point along a population curve. Jenny has done this remarkably well with diabetes. When we've treated diabetes in the past, people were measured by their 90-day average for their blood sugar or their HbA1c. And so if she and I had the same average, we might get the same treatment. And yet, if she's keeping her blood sugar in control and mine is varying widely, one would think that even with the same average, we might get treatments that are a little bit different. And I might need a different medication than Jenny to keep my blood sugar in control. So we're learning more about ways to deliver more precision, more guidance, more personalization, and also to take advantage of new technologies. I think there's interesting science that's coming out about ways that we can use virtual reality and augmented reality to help immerse people into environments that reduce anxiety, as an example, or PTSD, or we've even seen interesting companies that are dealing with ways in which we can deal with hormonal swings and allow individuals to manage menopause using some of these new tools. And so we're just at the early stages of learning new things, which is what makes investing in this sector so exciting.
So what are your views? Maybe I'll start with Lee on this, and then I want Jenny to comment. Like, what are your views on longevity and life extension? Because that seems to be the new buzzword, at least here in the Valley.
So our perspective, I think this is not only a 7-Wire perspective, but a Livongo perspective, is it's more important to put more life in your years than years in your life. And how do you add to the quality of lives? I don't know when the last time you had a doctor say to you, you know what, you're doing fine, you don't have to come in. I've been looking at your data, you're doing great, I'm going to cancel your appointment. But that's the place that we've come to using Livongo. It's like, your car is running just fine. Don't bring it in for an oil change. Save the money. And we should be able to do that. And so where does all of this, I'd say, biometrics and CRISPR and the like come into doing that? They're all really helpful and useful, provided that they're also being able to manage the things that frankly are the leading cause of death. And I think that we can do that with lifestyle guidance and counseling and the lifestyle changes that it engenders. Jenny?
Yeah, well, I love that you started with Lee and the longevity question, because he does have a few years on me, and clearly is wiser than I am. But I would just echo what Lee said, and I think there's another element to putting more life into the years and more years into the life, which is the quality. And one of the things we've really strive for is not just improving clinical outcomes, but making that less painful for people, right? So it is about preventing chronic conditions, but chronic conditions are going to happen. Type 1 diabetes, I'm, as Lee knows, I'm an obsessive exerciser. I eat healthy. I've always been that way. And it's an autoimmune disease, right? And it's now a chronic condition, and there's not a lot I could have done to prevent that. That said, if I can spend, 20 minutes less every day on that condition, I get more years in my life. And so this idea around not only allowing people and encouraging people to prevent, but making it seem, better is a big win. So if you're going to live to be 130, but you're going to spend 50% of every day in the doctor's office trying to live to be 130, I don't know if you're going to take that, right? That's more years in more life, more years in the life rather than life in the years.
I want to jump in with one other point, because something that's near and dear to all of us who are associated with these fine companies. And we've also seen a real focus on disparities in the delivery of care. And one thing that we believe is that digital health can reach into rural communities. It can reach across urban boundaries. We can find ways to help address some of those disparities by making healthcare more accessible. Most Americans have access to a cell phone. They can then have access to a variety of the services that we offer as a combined entity in ways that they might not be able to get in their community. And if they have access to the internet, and there are still many who do not, but we're working to improve that, they can have access to additional modes of communication. But I think that the importance that's coming from this change, this shift that Jenny referred to in terms of acceptance of these solutions, will also make care more accessible for so many who need it.
Wow, I think that is so true, because the inequity in healthcare system, and especially right now with the Black Lives Matter, which is a very important, that's an entire population, which it's not, top quality is not guaranteed across the board. I think, this personalization approach that with Livongo, you have built and continuing to kind of push it forward, I think is going to be phenomenal in, bridging that equity, the parity issue that we have in, access to healthcare, which is fantastic, by the way. I know we have like a couple of more minutes, so I just want to ask, what's your crystal ball for humans? And then what's your crystal ball for literally, let's say, this decade?
I think in relative to health conditions, I think that we will continue to have a lot that we cope with and struggle with. I think chronic conditions are clearly on the rise. We've seen infectious conditions clearly in the pandemic mode. You talk about climate, which will further exacerbate the current underlying chronic conditions. And at the same time, I see that where we are in digital healthcare, back to the crossing the Rubicon comment, as we really are at this incredible inflection point to change the experience and change the healthcare delivery system. And we can only get better from where we are. So I remain, despite the ongoing consistency of chronic conditions, the health impacts of infections and climate, I remain highly optimistic that we'll really start to improve the lives of individual people, because we're doing this at a very different approach, and that's scalable and meaningful at the individual level. Could not be more excited to be a part and a player in digital healthcare at this highly transformative time.
That was great, Jenny, and tough to follow. What I would say is that the lesson for me from the current pandemic is how interconnected we all are. When you think about a disease that has origins in Southeast Asia and how quickly it spread, not only there, but into North America and then the rest of the world, it shows that we're interconnected, but it also reinforces, in my mind, the responsibility that we have for each other. I was in a meeting with the American Heart Association earlier today, and there was a quote talking about how can I have dreams if my neighbors are having nightmares? And what we need to do is to recognize that we have a responsibility for one another that comes from building bridges and not building walls. And where I see digital health is being able to transcend borders, to transcend communities, to transcend some of the differences socially and economically. And my hope is that we recognize the power of these types of solutions and share them broadly, as opposed to keep them contained and isolated. And that's the world that I'd like to see us living in 10 years from now.
Wow. I think what a great way to end. Really, thank you so much. This has just been an incredible conversation. I'm sure there's no limit to how much more we can get your insights and your wisdom. But again, congratulations on this phenomenal merger and the road ahead and the incredible future. And thank you so much for actually building Livongo and really shaping, people's lives. And I think it's a direct impact. So again, Lee Shapiro and Dr. Jennifer Schneider, thank you so much for joining me at the Twin Tech 2020. And we can't wait to hopefully see you in person soon.
Thank you.
And
thank you,
have
Anita.
a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Schneider and Lee Shapiro, what an exciting discussion. Really exciting, the progress that you're making at Livongo. We're going to continue with a really exciting discussion in a few moments. I'm Scott Bowman. I'm one of the co-founders of Twin and one of Rob's partners at Clario. I want to begin by saying that the promise of artificial intelligence has been hyped since Alan Turing in the 1950s. But in 2016, when AlphaGo, Google's solution, beat Lee Sedol at the enormously complex game of Go and demonstrated that it was actually learning new moves as it was going, it sent shockwaves across the globe. Early evidence was that we were already crossing the digital Rubicon, as Rob would say. Today I'm going to be joined by Lee Che, co-founder and chief technology officer of Brightseed, a powerful company that is using artificial intelligence to illuminate and unlock nature's intelligence. Here's a sneak peek of what they're up to.
I I think we underappreciate the role that plants play in our everyday lives. They give us food, clothing, fuel, materials, personal care, medicine. But all of this richness comes from less than 0.1% of plant molecules. Science doesn't know what the other 99.9% of these compounds do.
Traditionally, trying to generate knowledge out of plants is very hard. Plant genomes are incredibly complex. They can be double, triple, 8 times the size of human genomes. But at Brightseed, we know the one way to find better answers faster is advanced computation, and that's why we built Forager.
Forager is a computational intelligence that helps us illuminate the world of plant compounds at a much deeper level and at a speed much faster than human intelligence. We go around the world and source plant species and go through a systematic process of preparation.
We do finer and finer fractionations to try to capture as purified sets of compounds as possible. Then we feed them into Forager and generate data. The other component is we teach Forager decades worth of high-level biomedical research to take that information on plants and map it to the world of human biological systems and make those connections that we can't see.
It performs similar to a Google search engine. Instead of indexing the world's information and the world's websites, Forager indexes the information of plants and their compounds. You can search for a health benefit and go directly to a hotspot. Forager already found a bioactive compound that is critical for maintaining a healthy metabolism, and it did so 10 times faster than traditional research. In a matter of months, it has mapped hundreds of thousands of molecules. Soon, it will reach millions. We can, of course, apply those to health, but also many places in which we can benefit going from synthetics to naturals. It will transform industries entirely, even biology and how we think about the plant kingdom. And that, in turn, will transform human society for generations to come.
Lee Che, welcome.
Hey,
Simon,
thanks for having me, Scott.
You bet. Simon Sinek urges us to start with the why before we talk about the what. Lee, what's your why? On a personal level, why did you found this company? And also, what's the why of Brightseed? What are the types of problems that you're trying to solve with Forager?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it to that level, Scott. I think that's all important in kind of the challenges that society obviously is facing today. And so for us, the whole purpose of Brightseed is to enable a healthier future by illuminating and activating really deep connections between people and plants. Yeah, so, I grew up in an agricultural region, Central Valley of California, so kind of plant life and plant sustenance has always been a big part of my reality. And it's and I studied plants when I went to school. I got my PhD in plant science and artificial intelligence. And the idea is that plants have been a partner to humans ever since the dawn of humanity. We eat them for food. We eat them as medicines. We use them for fuel. We use them for protection in the clothes that they wear and that we wear in the homes that we build. So, we're so tied to them that really, if you take them out of our diet, you're 3 times more likely to die prematurely than eating, the so-called bad stuff, fats, sugars, and red meat. But despite this deep relationship, we truly only know less than 0.1% of all the richness there is in the plant world.
Wow. That's interesting, and it's an interesting build to a question I'd love to pose. You've talked about illuminating the dark matter of the plant kingdom. Yeah, so obvious reference to dark matter in the universe. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I just mentioned we know less than 0.1% of all the richness of plants. So conversely, there's 99.9% of the richness of plants that we do not know. And we do know that they're explicitly tied to our health via our diet. But this absence of knowledge is what generally we call the dark matter of nutrition. And, and it's both an opportunity and a challenge. So there's so much there to explore and to utilize and to tap into to help human health. But since the dawn of humanity, it's been an unknown. But that's exactly why you want to use an artificial intelligence And for from Brightseed's side, we developed an artificial intelligence called Forager. And the whole reason that you apply AI is to make deep insights into phenomena that humans cannot make, and do it at a scale and a pace that humans cannot match, much like AlphaGo, learning the game of Go on the fly and beating the world champion.
So I want to get to Forager in a second, but I'm intrigued by this analogy to the dark matter of the plant kingdom. It occurs to me that sometimes ideas are a little bit ahead of their time. So the idea of dark matter, if I'm not mistaken, came from like the 1930s with an astronomer, Fritz Zwicky, I think it was. And it took until modern day times with the particle accelerator to really unlock the possibilities and the insights that we now have around dark matter. You have also had some fundamental technologies in artificial intelligence that are enabling this new possibility. Can you talk a little bit about the digital technologies that underlie Forager, and then we'll dive into what Forager is actually doing?
Yeah, I guess there are a couple analogies you can use. Really, seeing is believing is an old saying, and I believe, just like the Hubble telescope, we knew that there are massive solar systems out there with many different types of stars and planets, but it wasn't until the Hubble telescope came about that we could explore that really the furthest edges of the universe. Much like back in the day when they were trying to understand the nature of genetics, and it was really based on DNA. And we did not know the structure of DNA, but what we were able to do is develop pictures, essentially, of depictions of different shadows of DNA, so to speak. It wasn't until you pieced it back together were you able to make sense and find the truth. So much like those applications, we've developed a technology that allows us to use advanced molecular instrumentation to generate a lot of snapshots of plants and their compounds, but most of it's noise, and that's where the artificial intelligence comes in, because it is so good.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. I'd love to have you just double click. What exactly is it doing? When you say mapping the plant kingdom and then being able to correlate it with what happens in the body, talk a little bit about the technology for a second.
Yeah, so I think the best way to think about it is the end result. So the idea is that we know that plants drive health in the human body. We have all sorts of orthogonal data that point that out, and studies over decades that prove that out. Sadly, the bad effects of not eating plants. But the idea is that with this technology, you're able to ask it a fundamental question. With any AI, there's a learning objective. And for Forager, the idea is, what plants contain what compounds, and which of those compounds drive human health, and understand it at the molecular level. That's kind of that high resolution that we're thinking about. And the idea is to do this at scale. So the end result is essentially a large map of the plant kingdom, the different compounds that different plants contain, and the different areas of human health, actually the pathways in our bodies that these track to. So you get an overlay of kind of the human system as well as the plant system. And with this map, we believe we can drive innovation in terms of health and via diet.
So that's super interesting. So where do you see this going? Is this like sort of becoming the Google or a search engine for anyone that wants to be able to understand the plant kingdom better and what it might be able to do in affecting a mechanism of action in the body? Is that the idea? You'll become the search engine on which other people can develop solutions, or what?
Yeah, so we think the end result of this is really a complete high-resolution digitized library of the plant kingdom and all the health benefits that they track to. And once you put things in digitized form, that allows you to have scale, that allows you to have impact, because you can move at a speed and a direction that you can't than you couldn't prior in terms of doing things one at a time, or what you consider rifle shots. Here with this complete knowledge base, you're able to ask many different questions and find many different solutions from many different perspectives.
That's incredible. So, that's all super interesting and deeply important. Can you give us an example of, on a practical level, of what Forager's doing today? What are you finding? What are you learning? What has Forager been able to do today, or what do you think it will be able to do in the near term?
Yeah, actually, some exciting things are happening as of late. Well, one of the things that we asked Forager, we wanted to really test it, our own version of the AlphaGo contest versus the champion. The idea was that there's sadly a chronic disease epidemic upon us. Probably the leading area is diabetes, but what's following closely behind what people are saying are the next diabetes is fatty liver disease. It is something that pharma is chasing a cure for, has not found yet. So we thought, what better challenge than this? So we asked Forager, can you find us a natural compound from plants that might be a part of our diet and of helping those who are staving off this condition, but that in our kind of modern diet, we've lost it and are now susceptible to this. So in a matter of months, Forager returned a family of compounds from about 80 different plants that are already in our diet, including a number of them that are the basis of traditional medicines that we've shown in the laboratory and in other models to have an effect on fatty liver disease. And excitingly, just a few weeks ago, we started our first human study with it. And so, what's fascinating here is that these foodstuffs have been a part of our diet, including the basis of traditional medicines, but no one understood that it was these compounds and this particular application where they could help. So again, it's kind of revealing the underappreciated, the unseen, this deep connection between plants and people in a way that enables a healthier future.
Wow, that's super exciting. In a sense, a return to food as food was meant to be, right? Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And you're making that happen. So I'd love to delve into something a bit more provocative. So food companies have often been taking the brunt of criticism from consumers, and they're thought of as the enemy of health in some sense. But I think you've articulated in the past that we're going to need food companies to scale our way out of these solutions. I'm wondering if we're conflating how we are processing foods with unhealthy processed foods. And the question maybe is, might we be able to see a next generation of manufactured foods? Let's not use the word processed, but manufactured foods that actually do empower health. Do you see a future like that?
Yeah, well, what excites me most about what we're doing at Brightseed and the opportunity we have in this space, in this dark matter of nutrition, and the opportunity we have for a different future is the idea that there are a couple. Let's think about A and B. So A, in prior times, the food supply chain, the global food supply chain was really optimized in terms of providing calories and massively distributing calories, which in itself was a really important, 80, 100 years ago. And it did this through, optimizing on calories, optimizing on mass distribution and shelf life, really. Yeah. But now we have an opportunity where we can optimize on something different, something that will alleviate a great threat. And this is health. And so the idea with Forager, we're identifying plants that have a real molecular basis for human health. A lot of them already in our commercial crops and supply chain. And the idea is to partner with Big Food because they've solved another really hard problem, and that is infrastructure and the ability to produce and deliver at scale. So you imagine if you put those two things together, and this is what gets me most excited, is that it's actually tractable to have a massive footprint in terms of driving and delivering, health through food across the planet.
Wow, Lee, I feel like we could talk to you all day long, but I wanna ask you a closing question. I know you're a scientist, and scientists don't like making big, bold predictions. But let's just say that you're wildly successful at Brightseed, and we hope that you are. How is the world of food going to look differently 5 or 10 years from now as a result of what you're doing at Brightseed and in general? Artificial intelligence's possibilities that it's going to bring us?
Yeah, provocative question, Scott. Yeah. I'm a scientist, so I like to keep both feet on the ground.
Come on.
Well, the idea is that if we do achieve this in terms of, and I think we will, the ability to make these fundamental discoveries of health in plants and deliver them as solutions across the globe, then I think you give yourself a fighting chance at solving one of the great challenges of humanity, and that is kind of the rise of chronic disease. So I would love to see us be able to make a dent in those numbers and bring them down, not through therapeutic medicines, after the fact, where we're intervening in a heavy disease state, but really treating people through diet the way we've always had in prior generations, and that is delivering health through good food, through the current food system, and making a dent in that problem.
Wow. The dark matter of the plant kingdom. Food is medicine. Illuminating and unlocking nature's intelligence through artificial intelligence. Lee Che, we're grateful for everything you're doing at Brightseed, and we hope that you're wildly successful.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks
again
to Twin, for driving innovation in the world. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being with us today, Lee.
Take care.
I'm pleased to have with us today Dimitri Alperovich. We're going to talk a lot about cybersecurity and the future, but before I introduce Dimitri, I'd like to underscore that if we will have cyber lives, as we will, we must have cybersecurity. But issues like these should not be left to chance. We need to make sure that we think about them hard in advance and manage as things evolve, because obviously we can't tell exactly how they're going to roll out. So we should have a sense for what our parameters are, what our demands and interests are, what's in our best interests as we co-evolve into this future space. With this, I'm so pleased to introduce Dimitri Alperovich to the stage. Dimitri has been in the center of this flow since the early 2000s, and we'll come back to how he ended up in the cybersecurity space. But as many of you know, he's a co-founder and former CTO of Crowdstrike, one of the world's leading cybersecurity organizations, and has also been involved in many other essential challenges, such as early investigations into the Chinese activities online, and of course the break-in by nefarious actors of the Democratic National Committee servers, a rather well-known story these days. With this, I bring to the stage Dimitri Alperovich. Dimitri.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, good to see you. So Dimitri, I think we met 4 or 5 years ago in Jackson Hole originally, and at that time Crowdstrike was a thing, but it was pretty early. Let's go back even earlier than that. How'd you get started in the cybersecurity thing? Were you just a weird kid, or what caused you to go this direction?
I probably was a weird kid, but there's a little bit of an atypical story. A lot of people that got started in this industry early on were hackers and were dabbling sort of in the dark side. So I never did. But my dad was a nuclear physicist in Russia, working on nuclear power plants. And when we immigrated to the United States, he couldn't get a job in the nuclear industry for obvious reasons. Nuclear industry in this country was pretty much dead at that point. So he was just working as a programmer, but kind of keep himself motivated and interested, kind of give him his mind an exercise. He started studying cryptography. And in those days, early 90s, that was really just the beginning of the use of commercial cryptography and the use of advanced mathematics to really understand how to build unbreakable encryption. And he got interested in it, and we started a company together when I was still in high school, help him out. He was mostly interested.
So you started a company with your dad when you were in high school?
Yeah.
And you were like getting him coffee or stuff, or what were you doing?
No, I was actually doing a lot of the business side of it and helping him to develop the code as well. It wasn't the Crowdstrike success, but it did okay. And it really is what got me interested in security, because I realized early on that no matter how good your encryption algorithms are, it doesn't matter if someone else steals your keys. And it's all about this cat and mouse game of breaking into systems and getting access to secrets and manipulating information. And that got me even more interested in it, because the math was cool, but this chess game of move, counter move with adversaries was much more fascinating.
Great. So then fast forward, you did a few degrees, you got serious about this, and then Crowdstrike came along. So tell us a little bit about how that came together.
Yeah, so that was two plus decades after I'd already been in the industry, been part of startups, been part of big companies. And my prior job to Crowdstrike, I was running threat research and investigations at a company called McAfee, one of the big behemoths in cybersecurity. And in 2010, January of 2010, get a call from this little company called Google that had just discovered an intrusion into their systems and started working that case. We identified numerous other companies that were impacted by the same threat actors and ultimately traced it to China. And it was the first time people sort of set up and took notice that you had a nation state, not a criminal organization, not some hackers operating out of their parents' basements, but a military and intelligence service of another country that was breaking into private networks. And it was the first sort of big groundbreaking event. I named it Operation Aurora. And that led me to really start thinking that the problem was very different from what the industry was identifying, that you had to fundamentally shift the way you operate in order to defeat well-funded, highly capable teams of thousands of people in other countries that are now going after private industry. And that was really the impetus for Crowdstrike.
Right. Well, we'll come back to this issue of geopolitics and civil rights and on all of that and how it relates to cybersecurity. But before we do, what's something? I mean, Crowdstrike has been every entrepreneur's dream in terms of how it's gone, especially in the past year or so. But it wasn't an overnight success. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into making that happen. Tell us a little. You said there was a moment when it wasn't even clear that you guys were gonna keep things moving. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's right. It took us 10 years to really build it out into the huge success that it is now. And success is never a straight line. There are ups and downs, sometimes on the same day. But one of the things that's been really interesting to observe is how in the early days, there were so many doubters. There were so many people saying this will never work. We were doing for the first time a cloud-based security system. And at the time, people said, you can't trust the cloud. The cloud is, a joke. At the time, Amazon was just really early on in their journey, and few people were using them. And particularly when we're meeting with big financial institutions, we're telling them about our system. They said, this is great, but we will never use it because it's in the cloud. And years later, they're all customers. And the funny thing is that at the time, all of our competitors were saying, you can't trust CrowdStrike, their cloud-based system. 5 or 6 years later, they were all touting how they're a cloud-based system as well. So, perseverance is key. Don't listen to doubters. If you believe in something, keep pursuing that vision, and know that eventually all the doubters will turn around and say that what you did was really obvious in retrospect.
That's generally good advice, but I also have to point out that for all the CrowdStrikes and Dimitri Alperoviches, there are thousands of other people who stuck to their guns who failed. So, so there's that as well. Just for fun, what is your favorite anecdote from the history of CrowdStrike? And it doesn't even have to be relevant. Big points for humor.
Yeah. So we started the company in September of 2011, and we raised $25 million, which at the time was an incredible amount of money. I guess it still is even now, but we raised it literally on a PowerPoint slide. We had about 25 slides actually, and we joked there was $1 million per slide. We should have made more slides. But I got the team together, and we literally we practiced remote working before that was a thing, and before people really realized that you could do this efficiently. So I believe from the get-go that it was really critical to hire the best people wherever they are. So the first people that we hired that I brought on board, 10 people, were in 5 countries, 5 states and 2 countries. So everyone was completely distributed. And I hired them literally over the phone, we didn't have Zoom at that point yet. It was Skype calls and what have you. And we got them all together. I brought them all to New York to really figure out how we're going to build this new technology. So we spent a couple of days in New York, and I wanted to have, this was the first time people were meeting each other. I wanted to have a team building exercise. So I told one of my guys who's actually from New York, saying, listen, let's go out on Long Island, let's get a boat, do a nice event on the boat. Wasn't thinking that this was late September, hurricane season in New York City. But I told him, get a boat. And by the way, one of the things that's really important is for us to, even though we raise this much money, but we want to be frugal, and we want to show that we're not just going to be spending money on massages and all the stuff that different value companies get in trouble with. So I said, here's your budget. It was a pretty low budget, but get us a nice boat. At the same time, I was courting this amazing guy, Alex Ionescu, who was one of the game-changing hires for us. I knew that we really needed to land this guy if we wanted to build some cutting-edge technology. So I was courting him for weeks before we got started, and he was starting to lean our way. And I said, to close you, why don't you fly to New York? You'll meet the whole team. Bring your wife. We'll take you out on this boat. It'll be an amazing experience. So we go out to Long Island. He meets us there on the dock. And, I'm expecting to see a yacht, champagne, caviar, and that's certainly what he's expecting. What we found is a boat called Captain Lou.
Captain Lou,
a fishing boat. As dirty as you can imagine a fishing boat is. We get on it. Instead of caviar and champagne, there's literally like some chips and M&Ms. And we take off. And there's literally 6-foot swells that start crushing onto the deck of the boat. I turn around and I'm looking sort of inward, and my chief architect, who was outside, walks in completely drenched. And one of my guys says, "Oh my God, we almost just lost our chief architect. He almost got washed away." The wife of Alex that came over, the guy I was recruiting, just locked herself in the bathroom the entire time, would not come out. So we finally get back to shore a couple hours later. So we get back to the dock. We're walking back to land, and I turn around to Alex and I say, "So are you ready to sign, or we go back on the boat?"
and he signed.
He signed.
So the upside is you picked up Alex. The downside was you had to look for a new event planner.
Exactly. Yeah. From that point forward, the guy that was running our Intel team that planned this event was not allowed to plan events anymore.
Well, good for you. Let's shift back to cybersecurity in general. And you've brought up geopolitical threats. You mentioned 2010 and the investigation into the Chinese. And I want to underscore for people that was 10 years ago. It's making me feel old for sure. But a lot has changed in that time. So what are the most significant risks, do you think, from a geopolitical context as warfare, not necessarily warfare, but conflicts of various sorts, port online?
Well, I think the most critical point to understand now is that cyber is forever linked with geopolitics. And I like to say that we actually don't have a cybersecurity problem. We have a China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea problem. Because even though not every attack comes from those nation states, the vast majority of attacks that we see, even when they're pure cybercrime, originate from individuals operating inside of those countries. We obviously have seen that from Russia over the last 2 decades. We now have seen in the recent indictments from Justice Department how the Chinese are recruiting cyber criminals to facilitate their state objectives. We have seen North Koreans engage in criminal activity as well as Iranians. So a lot of the cybercrime activity is actually coming from those countries because they're shielding those individuals. Certainly, they don't have the monopoly on cybercrime, but the difference is that in other countries, those individuals are quickly identified, caught, and prosecuted. So you don't have this opportunity to build up complex networks, organizational networks of sophisticated criminal enterprises, but you do in those countries. So similarly to the way the mafia evolved in Sicily in the 1800s because of a lack of enforcement and the weak power of the government in Italy at the time, and you built up these behemoth organizations that are now sort of difficult to disrupt. You have the same thing taking place online in Russia, China, and other countries because they're able to operate with impunity, and in fact, in many cases, supported by the state. So it really comes down to how do we deal with those 4 countries, both from what they're doing to us from a state perspective, as well as from the fact that they're encouraging, enabling, or shielding criminal organizations operating within their borders.
So those criminals to us are assets to them, to these other nations.
Absolutely. What we see, and Russia really pioneered this. They started identifying those criminals that are operating within Russian borders. They started arresting them. But then suddenly you saw a month later those individuals getting out of prison and disappearing. And what we learned later is that they were actually given a choice. Do you want to spend 10 years in a camp in Siberia, or do you want to go work for the government? And by the way, when you work for the government, you'll wear the uniform, you'll conduct objectives of our government during the daytime. And what you do at night is your business. And if you want to engage in cybercrime on the side, to help pay the bills and more.
Well, that's concerning. What can we do about it?
I think it's all about how do we solve our relationships with these countries? How do we use all means of our power, diplomatic, certainly economic, and military if need be, to make it very clear to them that this will not be tolerated. And so far, we have not yet figured out the right levers to push on with these countries to make it clear to them that the cost of doing this is higher than the benefits that they're receiving.
What are some things we should know about and be paying attention to, say, over the next 7 to 10 years?
In 2010, about 10 years ago, really we started entering this new phase, the third generation, as I call it, where we're now dealing with disruptive and destructive attacks. So the most destructive attacks we've ever seen took place a few years ago with the NotPetya attack, which wasn't even targeted at the West, but caused billions of dollars in damage because it was the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, that had hacked the DNC in 2016. But this time they were targeting Ukraine. They wanted to destroy infrastructure of companies in Ukraine through a pretty novel attack, but it spread beyond Ukraine and hit companies all over the globe. So those are the types of things that we're starting to see more of, attacks on critical infrastructure. The Russians have targeted the power grid in Ukraine on a couple of occasions. We saw a very sophisticated attack on a refinery in Saudi Arabia about a year and a half ago. So those are the types of attacks that I would pay a lot of attention to. We often focus on theft of data, the Equifax type of hacks, but the more dangerous stuff is yet to come, where we could have physical impacts, we could have huge impacts on operations of critical infrastructure as a result of these operations.
So Dimitri, is the fact that these kinds of more dangerous attacks, the physical harm that you're talking about, not happening as that much, is it more because of the restraint of the bad actors?
There are a couple of answers to that. One, those are very, very sophisticated attacks. So luckily, very few countries are capable of orchestrating them today. Also, a number of systems in critical infrastructure are still relatively disconnected from the internet, so they would require physical access to actually perpetrate it. That is changing rapidly. In fact, due to COVID, more and more of that infrastructure is becoming remotely connected to allow people to manage it from home. So we're increasing those vulnerabilities. And the third element, of course, is that you don't just launch cyber attacks because you can. You need to have a strategic reason for doing so. And luckily, even the Russians, even the Chinese don't want to get into a hot conflict with the United States at this point. So there is a great deal of deterrence that we have today vis-a-vis those countries, because they know if they take down our grid, we're not just going to respond to sanctions. That will likely be treated as an act of war, and that's not going to be good for them either. So we still have, I think, quite a bit of deterrence against those countries. Now, of course, as we perhaps get into more and more troubled relations with Iran, for example, they may be a lot less deterred if we're hitting them.
Great. Well, it's a topic we could talk about for a while, but it's actually a topic related to Silverado Policy Accelerator. So you announced earlier this year, right before the crisis hit, that you were stepping down from your role at Crowdstrike and you were starting a new policy accelerator to help with these questions in Washington and beyond. First of all, tell us about Silverado and make sure to explain what the heck a policy accelerator is. It sounds great, but what is it?
Absolutely. So the concept behind the policy accelerator is that there's a lot of great ideas out here in Washington, D.C. and across the country that never actually get put into practice. You look at the return on investment of a lot of these organizations. They're generating ideas, they're generating reports. Very few of them ever get taken up by administrations, by Congress, because they're not well set up to push those efforts. They publish a report and then they move on, and you need a continuous campaign to push an issue to actually make sure that it gets adopted by policymakers. So the goal of the Policy Accelerator is really to take a venture approach to policy, to start looking at great ideas that are sort of at seed stage right now, and invest in those ideas to try to get them to, quote unquote idea with implementation in the government realm. And we're looking to do this in cyber policy, in trade, as well as geopolitics, so that we can actually try to solve some of the fundamental issues we face in this country on a bipartisan basis, but trying to get some consistent campaigns to get people to look at new ideas that are out there on these issues.
So you mentioned cybersecurity, also trade, and so this transcends the cyber realm.
Correct. So this is something that our new executive director and my wife are both passionate about. They have trade negotiator backgrounds, and they're very much interlinked, because if you look at cyber, a lot of what we're dealing with today, aside from the destructive attacks, is economic warfare. What China is doing to us is really not IP theft. They're waging trade warfare against us through cyber means, stealing all of this intellectual property and giving it to their domestic sector to enable that sector to better compete against us on the global stage. So trade needs to be part of the conversation. In fact, if you look at the trade war that the Trump administration had started against China, it was started because of what's known as a 301 regulation that the USTR, U.S. Trade Representative, had passed that enabled them to institute these tariffs against China. And why did they do that? The cause is the IP theft that the Chinese have been engaged in.
Right, which has been well known and very significant for many years. So it was a long time coming to attempt to address that. And I would say it will be better for both the Chinese and the Americans if we figure that out over the next few years, because otherwise it comes to a head. But I do want to clarify something, though. You said something really interesting, and that is you're an engineer who married a trade negotiator. I'm going to have to guess that you don't win many arguments at home.
Oh, absolutely. It's right. She wins every argument. I really view Silverado as Crowdstrike 2.0. I've always had a passion for policy. In fact, when I was studying cybersecurity in college 20 years ago, I took a ton of courses in international affairs, almost got a major in it, but was always passionate about the issue. And then went into the cyber industry thinking I'd never use that knowledge again. And lo and behold, Google hack happens, and I'm dragged into DC to help the State Department to brief people on the National Security Council and the Situation Room. And that has continued pretty much nonstop over the last 10 years. And I always believe that the way we solve these issues is both through technology, which I try to do with Crowdstrike, but also policy. So I'm coming back to the policy piece with Silverado having, in many ways, addressed it with technology.
Well, I'd love to talk to you more. I know you just officially launched Silverado this month, so maybe in a way this is the big coming out party for Silverado. I'd love to talk about maybe Twin can do something with you guys, share what you're doing, maybe see if any of our Twinians are interested in being engaged with this. And I'm particularly excited about Silverado because of your effort to be bipartisan. These days in this polarized world, it seems almost impossible to bring these sides together. But somebody's got to try really hard, because if we don't solve that, then we don't get anywhere good. So we'd love to be with you on that journey.
Thanks,
so,
Mark.
So 10 years from now, there's a tweet storm about you. Now, I should share with everybody, this would mean yet another tweet storm about Dimitri, but set that aside. 10 years from now, there's a tweet storm about you, and you're actually happy about it. What is it?
Well, God, if there is another tweet storm, and I hope there isn't, but if there is, I hope it's about something like my preference for plaid jackets and the fashion trend that I started in cybersecurity with relate to that.
So is that is plaid jacket your thing in the cyber world?
These are my signature jackets, yes.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. Maybe you can launch a line of signature jackets too. I'm sure those will go over big with the work from home engineers who really need to up their style game. During your conversation about early days in building Crowdstrike, you mentioned the best people 3 times in a rather short conversation. So it really wasn't about the technology so much, it was about the best people you could find, regardless of where they were in the world. So even before the rest of us got thrust across the digital Rubicon, our theme for TwinTech 2020, you and your colleagues had already waded across the river and were well on the way to Rome. And I'm glad you guys were on the way there in front of us because it makes us all a little bit safer in this journey. You mentioned the game-changing hire, for instance. I think that's how we have to think about our businesses, not so much about technology or markets. They're all important, but about the people that we bring in, the people that we work with. This success thing is never a straight line, and I dare say, unfortunately, neither will be this third generation of attacks and what might come in the future. The economic warfare that we're entering into, it's really not just about stealing people's data, it's also about the relationships between individuals, groups, communities, and nations, as it has been for centuries. It reminds me of, I modestly say, my ancestor, Sir Francis Drake, back many centuries ago in the United Kingdom. The British, the English knew him, of course, as a privateer and a hero, and the Spanish knew him as a pirate. And so Drake was exactly the sort of fellow, maybe a little bit more honorable than the people you're talking about now. But you know what? History doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. Dimitri, thanks again so much for being with us. I can't wait to see where Silverado goes and to be a small part of that journey.
Thank you, Robert.
Welcome back to Impact House Chicago. I'm here with Christy Ross, my co-host for our finale today. And in a moment, we'll be joined by Moran Cerf, my colleague at Northwestern University, everybody's favorite neuroscientist. Let's bring Moran onto the screen with us. Moran, how are you doing?
Wonderful. It's been a hectic morning, but I'm glad that I'm settled and it looks like I'm totally not stressed.
Yeah, you actually look great. In fact, so for everybody's information, Moran tried frantically to get here from New York City last night and this morning and eventually had to give up. So I suppose that's emblematic of the challenges we face, but fortunately technology has come to our rescue this time because your feed looks great. You need a shave, but otherwise you look great. So our purpose here is to, you guys are proxies. You're proxies for our Twinians who are watching in cyberspace and all of our live stream. They've gone off into these delegate conversations or looked at our study guide and what were we taking. So what are your impressions? And I'll start, Christy, with you since you're here in the studio.
Sure, and looking across all of these interviews and all of this information, I'm sort of trying to tie all of this together, right? And so I'm going to start with a comment that Navi shared on what went right during the pandemic.
Right.
And that was, more solidarity and more sharing of information and all of that. And more sharing of more information, really just a function, but it also sparked collaboration, which of course we all know leads to innovation. But the thing that I think was interesting is to say this simplistically, sharing information, requires data. It requires access. It requires security. And you start to pull all of those things together. And for it to work well, that really each link in that chain needs to be strong. And so it really sort of highlights for me as well the vulnerability of something not actually working or coming together without all of us pulling together to make that happen.
Right. I mean, just to build on that a little bit, I didn't appreciate when we started planning TwinTech how different not just the technology or building the program would be, but the design of the program, the structure of it, doing the pre-records, editing them down to an amount of time that would fit into the flow, dealing with the delegate, the live stream, all these things. And beyond technology, really everything about this convening is different than past convenings.
Right.
Everything about it, except there are human beings involved.
Right, but actually connecting in the same way. You can't quite do it the same way. So you have to really be far more cognizant of making that deeper connection.
Absolutely. And speaking of in the same way, even though Christy and I are here in the studio, we are just over 6 feet apart. So by the way, we're fully compliant with CDC and we've worked really hard to do this. we are just over 6 feet apart. And that's something before the pandemic we wouldn't have thought about at all. So Moran, what is something that has struck you from the program so far today?
A couple of things. I'll try to be really, really brief. So one thing that I noticed that came up again and again had to do with the AI and how superior it is. And it was mentioned in the conversation with Lee Che when he spoke about AlphaGo. One thing that I think it was not mentioned that I really think is important for us to notice is one advantage that machines have on us is that AlphaGo, for example, could play against itself. So if you want to train on playing chess, you can be a really good chess player.
I don't know, Moran. I know a lot of people who play against themselves all the time. But yeah.
At least in chess, it's really, really hard to play chess or to play AlphaGo. So we need each other. So the point is that it's not just that there are power in many, many brains. You need to be able to not have the same brain play the two roles. And computers can actually forget the other side. So they can make a move, forget their side, and play the other one. And in many ways, I think this is one thing that's interesting about society. We not only depend on each other to have multiple brains, but we also depend on each other to have not the same brain. And in that sense, I think that there's an advantage here to having crowd think about problems together. So this is one thought that came again and again in multiple talks. The other one I thought it was relevant when it comes to the conversation about the plants with Lee is that what he alluded to, and I think it's something that we're learning more and more, many times we plan for one thing, a pandemic or an event comes and changes course, and then we learn something else. And in doing that, we actually do a better job. So in many ways, a lot of medicine was an attempt to get at one thing that ended up at another. The best example I could think of is Viagra. Viagra was not supposed to be an erectile dysfunction drug. It was supposed to be a heart disorder solution. But as it turns out, in clinical trials, most participants are male students. Those are the ones that are doing everything for $20. And most people that are actually administered the tests are nurses that are female. And the consequence of having an erection while the study was happening was an unintended event that led to the big successes. So in many ways, I think that the idea of the plant research here is that we have tons of things that we already know, that already work, but they're made for one thing. An event that kind of stirs the pot could teach us that the same thing could work for something totally different.
Right, and I'll build on that. Even the prosaic experience of taping an interview like I did with Dimitri Alperovich. Normally in an event, you'd have the interview and que sera, sera over a limited period of time. But Dimitri and I spoke for almost an hour, and we were able to go back and carve it up. So we could do pre-recordings before. We could do web conferences before, but nobody did because it wasn't as good. Now we're foisted into this and we're learning really fast. Not as fast as I would like, but we're learning really fast.
Right.
So any thoughts about anything else that struck you, Christy?
Yeah, well, a couple things. I think one of the things that Lee and Jenny had said was, we've from Livongo that we've crossed that first digital Rubicon, but now we need to take that next step in making the pathways more personalized. And but what and how you do that is you have to get that data, and people have to be willing to give that data. So that concept of give to get is really important, but also I think that people are far more apt to give that kind of information when they're getting something that is helpful to them and very specific to them, which I think is so critical. That just everything's been solved for the masses before, right? And really now I feel like we're sort of flipping the coin and saying, no, we need to actually look at this at a very personalized level.
So I love this because one of the things we're trending to in this session next is complex systems. So we're going to be talking to David Krakauer from Santa Fe Institute about complexity theory, collective decision making. And one of the things he talks about is a lot of the psychology, neuroscience has looked at individuals, less so at collectives. And this is where complexity comes in. So your point is we can become more personalized for each individual, provide more value, but then we also have to think back to the broader perspective as how each of those individual decisions roll up into this collective. And we haven't encountered this before in history the way we are now. Moran, any thoughts about, from a neuroscience perspective, about collective decision making?
Yeah, so I'll build 2 points on what you and Christy just said.
Please.
One thing is that I agree. People need to share their data for the greater good. collective information leads to collective decisions, and it leads to better solutions for everyone else. A lot of people, and this is where I tie it to Dimitri's work, are worried that if they share their data, they're going to basically be spotted on and identified. And the reality is that there's more and more research on differential algorithms that basically allow you to share your data in a way that it's still used by this kind of entity that looks at the information and keeps you anonymized. So in a way, we're aiming towards a solution that will do the things that Dimitri spoke about with the thing that Chris just spoke about. Allow you to share information and not lose your information. And I want to say one last thing about what Dimitri said that is important. There's one thing that I think we should say on security, and I'm speaking now as a former hacker and as a current neuroscientist. Yeah. Most hacks, despite all the stories we're being told, are not the ones we imagine where someone sits in their basement and kind of figures out the password and so on. It's actually someone giving you the password by phone. You just call them and you say, I really need it, and they give it to you. Most hacks, over 90%, are not someone doing something smart, but just calling the right person at the right time, or a disgruntled employee giving the password and so on. So in many ways, the problem we need to solve isn't just the problem of cybersecurity as a solution by companies like Crowdstrike solving the security of the system, but also psychologists, neuroscientists helping us know how to answer the question at the right time, how not to let stress give things and so on, how to think of security as something that helps us all rather than something that I just do without paying attention to.
The human element of it, right?
Yeah,
the human element.
Well, we create all the problems and create all the solutions. Yes. I mean, this is ours to make.
In that order.
In that order, yeah. And that's a fact. I actually believe philosophically that humans need problems. We thrive on those. And please don't take that the wrong way. Humans thrive on problems. So thank you for this. This is great. We're going to come back again for another conversation like this a little bit later on. But as we go to break, and this break, by the way, feel free to use as a break, or any of our delegates, feel free to go and find a delegate conversation space or a one-on-one conversation, maybe even go to networking to see who else is on board. And everyone in the live stream, during this, we'll be sharing photos from Twinian Al Landry, retired Colonel Al Landry, who's also a phenomenal photographer. And so during our break, we're going to share a bunch of photos that Al Landry gave to us that he has been posting through the pandemic. Al decided that there was too much negative news, too much heaviness in the air. And so he decided a few months ago, every day, I'm going to post on my Facebook account a picture of nature. And he's just knocked it out of the park. Thanks to Al Landry, thanks Christy and Moan, and we'll see you in a little bit.